in the interest of time, we'll go on to the next topics. The next topic will be Professor Swire's discussion of social networks, freedom of association, and privacy.
When I left government about 10 months ago, I hadn't been working as much on privacy, and now I'm trying to research the things that really puzzle me. And one of the things that puzzles me is sometimes you go to a conference, let's see if we can imagine this, where there's a keynote in the morning about how our technologies of social networks help us do human freedom, freedom of association, political change, really, really good things that really advance the freedom part of CFP. And then there might be a panel later in the day, maybe at lunchtime, where they have Frontiers in Privacy as the title, and we realize the same sharing that we were cheering for at 8:30 in the morning, we're scared of at 12:30 in the afternoon. Okay? Let's see if we can imagine such a time. And so we find ourselves just torn in two different directions by this wonderful ability of social networks to connect people and enable political change, and the fear that somehow things are really slipping out of control. So I've been puzzled by this, and I went and did searches on freedom of association, the political change, and privacy, and there wasn't any account out there about how these fit together. So I basically assigned myself a homework assignment or a law school exam. It seems like social networks implicate both freedom of association and privacy discussed. And a draft of that paper was released this winter at the Center for American Progress site, and I'm continuing to work on it. And again, I welcome thoughts from you all about how to do it better. But the freedom of association part is, the Obama campaign, reaching out and getting people to mobilize people to do things by finding the folks who are going to be mobilizable. It's the Tea Party. It's not just the left or the right. And one example that's concrete to think about is how we think about the do not track proposals that at least some people in this group would probably favor and that have been discussed by the Federal Trade Commission. Now, do not track sounds a lot like do not call, right? How many people here have signed up for do not call so you don't get, okay, like most of the people in the room. That's like the most popular government thing ever. It's a regulation that President Bush signed in the Rose Garden. He liked the regulation so much. That's a popular thing. Do not call has an exception for political parties, right? So you still get called by your favorite or least favorite political party. It has an exception for nonprofits. And the idea was, for those exceptions, is that there's freedom of speech for the political folks and the nonprofits to call you. And if we didn't allow them to call you at night, it might violate the First Amendment. Now, let's think about that for Facebook or social networks. And let's think about it for do not track. For do not track, the proposals has been we have no tracking of what you do on the internet and they can't send you targeted ads. Okay. Do we allow the exception for political parties? Are we cutting off the Democratic Committee or the Republican Committee's ability to associate with you and really network with you if we don't let them use the technologies that are available to them? And so the law professor, the boring nerd part of the paper goes to U.S. legal doctrine and suggests that the facts might be tough. We might need, depending on how the courts come out, an exception for political parties, but that might mean then the creation of databases and tracking technologies that are very worrisome to a lot of people. So I think going forward, the point here is the freedom of association, the 8:30 in the morning heroic side of social networks, is pretty tempting and pretty powerful and something U.S. judges might recognize, but that might pose a challenge to some of the privacy limits, at least as a matter of law, that people here are tempted to put in place.
Well, I guess I would just say one quick response is robocalls. Is there any real social value or good thing that comes about from robocalls, political robocalls? And I would say absolutely zero. Those are actually totally and utterly worthless. But that's my own view.
Well, I also at 8 o'clock and come out at 7 o'clock. You got to vote now, or you'll lose your chance to affect America.
I also think that one anecdote, and I'll violate my own privacy in giving this anecdote, is I gave to Obama's campaign, and as a reward for that, I get emails from that campaign. Tons of emails, thousands of emails, a torrent, an assault on my mailbox to the point where I couldn't take it anymore and I clicked the unsubscribe. Didn't work. I still get tons of emails. I clicked unsubscribe again. I clicked unsubscribe. I wrote nasty comments like, I'll never ever give to your campaign again if you keep sending me emails. I still get emails. This is the situation. I think that, I'm not saying don't use these technologies and don't use information sharing, but I think that they need to be regulated just as much as the businesses do, because I think that their practices are quite annoying and worse than any other company I've dealt with when it comes to email and being assaulted by it. And it makes me really sad to say it, but it's a persistent problem.
Jules.
But Dan, isn't what most candidates do, other than the people who can spend $100 million on TV because they're the incumbent or very rich, kind of annoying? I mean, I ran for office many times. I stood at the subway, kind of, annoying people. Hi, before you get on the metro, can I hand you my flyer? And they were, I was intruding on their personal space as they were running for the subway. So let's assume some horrible fact about, a candidate came out a week before and the major media didn't care, or and a cheap, free, who knows, the robocalls are getting pretty cheap, right? You can do them over IP, and that was the way that morning to tell everyone that it was Obama who tweeted his junk, or whatever the key fact that you had to get out. So are you ready to put the value of this intrusion, which we all care about, over, oh my God, the election, Watergate broke and it was 2 hours before, and this was the way to tell everybody on their cell phone on the way to the poll that,
Yeah, but the problem is you're going to get lost in a sea of crap. And the thing is, a little bit of an annoyance, a little teeny bit of intrusion is fine if it was in reason. The problem is that no one does it within reason, the robocalls are out of control, and the result is that you get ridiculous annoyance, and everyone's going to dismiss it all. Just like with unsolicited email. Maybe occasionally there could be, out of the billions of spam out there, there may be 5 that are actually good. The problem is when you have a billion and only 5 good ones, the system doesn't work.
But is political speech important enough that intrusion and that annoyance means the world will change?
If the messages were actually meaningful, yeah, but I think 90% of the robocall messages are false, misleading, and destructive. I'm not sure I've rarely heard about a good robocall, like a story like, this was a really informative robocall, and it actually really informed someone's decision effectively.
Would you judge the quality of the political speech?
What?
Who should be judging the
quality? Well, the quality of political speech is very low and it's zero. Do you really want that avenue to annoy people when you've got very low quality? And it's actually worse for political speech because people then dismiss it.
Can they rein things in a little? And we'll quickly have one more question before you go to the next topic.
Adam Taylor from the Data Center. Professor Solove, I'm just wondering what the limiting principle is there, because we obviously have a First Amendment which says that even offensive and really stupid and annoying speech has to be tolerated, and that you have to yield to less restrictive means when you are annoyed or find these things intolerable. Obviously, you've made an exception for privacy, but in your paradigm, it appears that privacy always trumps free speech.
No, not at all. I think that's totally wrong. I think that when it comes to do not call, it's not that, I have a right to say, look, I don't want you to intrude on my phone and call me. Just like I think, I should. And it's not like the government telling you can't call people. It's me as a citizen saying, I don't want to be bothered by you. And I don't have to listen to your speech if I don't want to hear it.
And you don't have to. But
I don't want to be called. I want to be bothered. And I think I have a right not to be bothered. And the First Amendment doesn't give you a right to kind of come into my home and bother me. It stops the government from banning your speech, but it doesn't give someone the right to broadcast speech into my mind or interrupt me with my phone. It does not do that. I think a citizen has a right to say, I don't want someone to call me.
Pretty slippery slope to censorship.
How many robocalls did you get from Obama?
In D.C., none, but that's because I live in D.C.
How many emails?
Okay, so I'm going to
at least over 100 or more. Like probably hundreds.
A day?
Not a day, but a lot.
Okay, next topic. Future of the Fourth Amendment.
Okay. All right. So the Fourth Amendment is currently governed by the reasonable expectation of privacy test. That test is a test that's been long-standing, was designed to try to expand the scope of the Fourth Amendment. So basically it works like this. If you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in something, that's when the Fourth Amendment provides protection. If you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy, no Fourth Amendment protection for you. There is zero protection unless there's a statute or something else. So that's the threshold as to whether or not you get any kind of protection from the Fourth Amendment. I think this approach is really, really wrong. I used to really like the reasonable expectation of privacy test, and now I've come to realize it's actually a bad test. The Fourth Amendment's language itself says the right to be secure, actually uses the word secure, from unreasonable searches and seizures. But the way the Supreme has interpreted this expectation of privacy test is an incredibly narrow way that has nothing to do with what society expects or what society wants. It's just what the judges think privacy is, and it's a very narrow concept of privacy. Basically, total secrecy. An example of how absurd it's gotten. This is a search under the Fourth Amendment. Feeling the outside of a bag for something winds up being a Fourth Amendment search, full Fourth Amendment protections. I am protected against that. Now suppose the government wants to put me under 24-hour surveillance for the rest of my life out in public. No Fourth Amendment protection. The government wants to gather every single record that has ever produced about me held in the hands of a third party. No Fourth Amendment protection. And I think when we look at those two examples, this feeling of a bag and this pervasive surveillance and pervasive data gathering, and we say, where do we want the government to be regulated? What is more invasive of privacy? What is more concern to our freedom and democracy? I think the answer is clear that the latter thing is worse, and yet it doesn't get protected. And we get these absurd results. And I think if we go back to basics, I think we should really ask just the basic question, which is what, in fact, do we want the Fourth Amendment to regulate? What should it regulate? And if you look at the text of it, I think the answer becomes clear. It's when there's an unreasonable search and seizure. When is a search and seizure unreasonable? It's when it creates a problem that isn't addressed. When it creates a problem, it doesn't matter whether you call it a privacy problem or some other kind of problem. It could be just excessive government power. It could be whatever problem it is. That's when we should have regulation. And I think we just should ask the question, is this the kind of activity that the government's engaging in where we should have some degree of oversight or some degree of limitation or justification required before the government can do it? And if the answer to that is yes, there would be a benefit from having oversight and having this limitation, and you don't have that, I think that makes the search unreasonable. And I think that should be what we ask. And I think if we ask that simple question, if we look at it that way, we have a much more Fourth Amendment that applies in a much more responsive way to the issues that it really has to address, rather than what we have now, which is a weird, silly gotcha game about what 9 people think privacy is. 9 people who basically live in caves. So that's really what we have now, and I think that if we do a different approach, we will have a much more productive time of things.